You are listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with my husband, Steve Worsley, the toxic mold expert and your number one source for mold consulting and mitigation in the USA. Here is episode 139, Toxic Mold Exposure and Your New Year's Resolutions. Before we get started on this episode, a short or not so short disclaimer. While all attempts have been made to verify the content provided in this podcast, neither the podcaster or the producers assume any responsibility for errors, omissions, or alternative interpretations of the issues discussed herein. All information stated in this podcast is the opinion of Steve Worsley. Steve Worsley is a mold specialist with over 20 years of experience in the construction and mold industry. The Toxic Mold Podcast is for information sharing purposes only. The views expressed are those of the podcaster and his alone. These views should not be taken as expert instruction or commands. While there may be references to medical conditions and symptoms, all solo podcast episodes are the opinion of Steve Worsley, and any medical questions or concerns shall be addressed with the appropriate licensed medical professional or professionals. As the podcaster refers to different mold types, please be aware that Steve Worsley is not a microbiologist, and questions concerning mold specifics should be answered by the appropriate professional. The listener is 100% responsible for his or her own actions. You can check out Steve's books on Amazon about mold and dealing with mold in your home at amazon.com/author/Steve Worsley. And if you're interested in scheduling a mold consultation, over the phone consultation with Steve, you can be sure to find out more about those and his availability at cnccontractorservices.com. Now, let's get to the episode. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode. Wow, the first episode in 2022 of the Toxic Mold Podcast.
Yes. Yep. We're finally into 2022. And for our listeners that listened to the last podcast, we don't do resolutions like you and I personally, but we wanted to do a podcast of what our listeners should be doing for New Year's resolutions.
That's right. Because even though we don't do them, there are lots of people out there who like their New Year's resolutions, right?
Yep. And don't give up. Our listeners, we talked about last week when did you say most people give up?
Oh, by February 15th. Yeah. By Valentine's Day, it's over. Yeah.
So mold doesn't really care what time of year it is or what your resolutions are. So we just wanted to go over some things our listeners could do, something fairly brief that we don't dive too deep into because we've done that in other podcasts.
Exactly. So when we think about New Year's resolutions in terms of the indoor air quality of somebody's home, the first thing you always talk about, and you cover this so many times because a lot of people don't do it, it's documentation.
Yes. It's such a big deal. Once again, I'll do my analogy I always do as far as the medical stuff. You go into your doctor and you say, yeah, my shoulder's just really been bothering me the last few days. And we'll say he's an orthopedic and he says, okay, did something happen? And you're like, I don't know. He's like, well, did you fall? I don't know. Well, have you ever had shoulder problems? Well, yeah, kind of. If you're that vague, the orthopedic's going to look at you the way I'm going to look at you and go, come on, man. Exactly. I can't, you got to give me some information to work with. And so if you can go to your orthopedic and you could say, yeah, I was shoveling snow. I slipped and fell a few weeks ago. It hurt for a couple days. I thought the pain went away. Now it's come back. It's really bad. I've never had shoulder issues, so this is new to me. Then the orthopedic has something to go off of, just like I do. If you come to me and you just say, I don't know, I'm feeling sick, I think it's mold, and I ask you questions and you can't answer them, it's going to cost you a lot more money as my client to get to the bottom of it if you don't have documentation.
And so when you say documentation, it could be that somebody's using notes on their iPhone. It could be that they're using a Google Doc that they can access on their phone, on their smart device, anywhere.
Or that little notebook we give in the mold box.
That's right. The journal that we give for people who buy the mold box. But either way, I guess my point is there's no excuses about why you can't document something, and you should document it in the moment that it's happening.
Exactly. Yep. like I said, the more information you have, the better off it is because, when we're talking about mold sickness and mold exposure, there's a lot of avenues we have to go down and look at. And obviously I call it the blue collar side, but then you have the medical side of it. So all that documentation, even if you're not going to share that with me, I don't need to know your personal health history. But if you've had blood work or, mycotoxin testing, that kind of stuff is very beneficial to me, and it's going to be very beneficial to your doctor. So keep in mind when you're writing this stuff down, it's not just for the mold specialist. It's for anybody that's going to get involved.
Absolutely. And so would you also recommend that people, at the same time that they document signs and symptoms, they also take pictures? If you're going to bring it to a doctor, take a picture of a rash that shows up. Take a picture of... So documentation is not just the writing down, it's also the taking the pictures of areas in the home. Yep.
Yeah, and it's, this, but I'm because of the profession I'm in, I'm a cover my butt kind of person, and I take pictures and I have tons of documentation. Let's just say one of our listeners, it's a rental and they're going to have to deal with the landlord. I mean, you need all this documentation. So it's a big deal. And it, like you said, the day and age we're in, we have on an iPhone, I would assume Samsung has some sort of
notes
app or something, but there's no excuse to not put, the date you're experiencing whatever mold sickness symptoms, or you believe that they're mold sickness symptoms.
Absolutely. And we have apps where you can take a picture and you can put in the notes the picture. So everything's on a phone now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of scary, I guess, because we were just talking about, how our phones and computers listen to us.
Yeah, they do.
And, but there's so many ways that you can address those things. And having pictures, especially for someone on the construction side of it, it's a big deal for me. Like when somebody says, yeah, I have a bunch of mold, and I ask for a picture and they send me a picture of just a little mold spot on the baseboard, to me, that's kind of like, okay, so that's their version of a lot of mold. Mm-hmm. Whereas I would look at that and go, well, that's not much, but there's probably mold behind that baseboard, and then there's probably other issues we can't see. But pictures help a lot.
And video helps too.
Yeah, videos are very handy. And, people say, well, the file will be too big to email it or whatever. We have all sorts of stuff. I know for CNC, for all the stuff we do, the mitigation consultations, we use a Google Drive file. And it's simple. You're the one that, I'm not technologically inclined, but you're the one that's shown me how to do all that, and it's simple.
Exactly.
You don't even have to have a Google account, correct?
You do have to have a Gmail account, but that's free. So free is free.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I just thought I sent a link, and whoever.
Well, anybody can receive it and anybody can open it, but if you're going to start a Google folder, it has to come from a Gmail account.
Oh, okay.
So you've got to have one.
That's why we have you on the podcast.
Exactly. It's totally free and easy to use. So the first thing here for mold New Year's resolutions is documentation. What is the second that you would tell people if they're going to do things differently in terms of their indoor air quality?
Just to be proactive. And when I say that could mean many things, That could mean that you have a teenager that loves to eat food in their room, and they leave the plate, they shove it underneath their bed, and it starts growing mold and all sorts of crazy stuff. Be proactive and make sure you go in there and make them finish eating that. That was a joke. But be proactive in making sure that they're not leaving that food in there. Pay attention to that same teenager that likes to take a hot shower and never uses the fan. Maybe it's your spouse. You know what I mean? There are things like that. Pay attention to water stains. There's a whole slew of things. Like I'm not going to go through the whole checklist because it would take an hour.
But do your fall and spring checklist.
Yeah. We offer plenty, on our Facebook page, the emails I send out, and the checklist that they can get through the website, correct?
Yes.
And all they're doing is they're just signing up for a biweekly email.
Exactly. Name, email. You get access to loads of information that you will not find on the Facebook page or on cnccontractorservices.com.
Right. Yep. Yeah, it's, I do the emails. It's every other week. We don't we're not sending you spam stuff. We're not selling your email to anybody.
Nope.
Not
but
at this
valuable.
point. It's not worth enough yet.
But valuable information that you're only going to get via those emails. So being proactive is about signing up for an email list where you're going to learn new things.
Right. Yeah. And I keep just, even the biweekly email, I try to keep it fairly short, 3 or 4 paragraphs. It's just, I'm not a big into reading kind of person. And if I see a long email from whatever email list I'm on, I usually just delete it. But I keep them short enough and informative enough that our followers can read that and go, oh, okay, yeah, I remember, Steve mentioned whatever about a water stain, and they can get more information from that.
Absolutely. So then what's the third mold New Year's resolution that you have for people?
So something, normally I tell people to test every other year, especially when we're talking about radon. But for mold, if it were me, and it's easy for me to say because I'm the specialist and I have the equipment, but it's well worth, to have it done professionally, probably $500 that yearly have air testing done. So, the air quality. And there's do-it-yourself kits. I don't ever endorse any certain brands. I don't recommend a non-professional doing it. I always like a professional to do it. But, if you can't afford the $500, there's other avenues. And, you can have the air tested and it'll give you a good idea. Plus, that just reminded me of one of our consultation packages, which is very cheap.
Yeah.
And that's I don't even know the name of it, but it's an interpretations from your lab results.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, you can go cheaper on air testing, and that may give you the what in terms of the results, but it won't give you the why or the how.
Exactly.
And so you pay more money so that you can actually get an interpretation of what those results mean, so you understand the why and the how.
Right. Yeah, and the interpretations package is the least expensive one. Yeah. That's not a phone consultation. That's just I more or less look over the results and, I give you, like a radiologist would do with x-rays or an MRI. I give you my opinion on that. Now, we do obviously offer other packages where we could get into things way deeper, but air testing is a big deal, in my opinion. I mean,
it's a huge deal, but I would say, having seen what radiologists type up in their interpretations, if you actually want somebody to explain to you in language you'll understand, you're probably going to want a mold consultation.
Yeah. And for our listeners, what my wife's saying is that, yeah, I can give you my opinion on just air samples, but it's not going to give me enough information to really go off of. It's like you said, the radiologist.
Correct.
The radiologist sends his interpretations back to the orthopedic. And the orthopedic's the one, which in my shoes would be the consultant, says, okay, you did this, this, and this. You were shoveling snow, you fell, you hurt your shoulder. That's where a normal, I guess I would call it just the full mold consultation would be a lot more.
And not even, because even the ortho doesn't do a great job. They go, this is what I think.
Yeah.
And maybe, whereas what you do with people is you actually educate them on all of the dynamics that, based on what you've looked at in their file, based on the information they've given you, the pictures, you give them a full educational lesson.
Right.
On what you believe is at the heart of what's going on in their home. Most orthos are not doing that for an hour to 2 hours on the phone.
Well, and it's nothing personal, but I don't prefer to hear back from my clients again. I hope to educate them enough that they know what a healthy home should be, whereas a doctor keeps making more money if you keep coming back.
You want them to not need you.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you're right. I approach it from a totally different aspect, and I want to educate our listeners. Just that's why we do this podcast. So, but yeah, I mean, it's well worth having those consultations, and some people think they can't afford it. And what do we always say?
What's your health worth?
Exactly.
That's the question. So 3 of the mold resolutions for this new year: documentation, be proactive, air testing once a year. What's your call to action for people?
So we talked about documentation, and, you got to have somewhere to write it down, whether it's your phone or a journal. I can look at your bookshelf and you have piles of
Tons of
journals.
journals.
So go buy you a journal, figure out how you're going to do it. I don't care if you email it to yourself, but make sure that you have a way you're documenting things. Okay? Like I said about consultations, go buy one of our consultation packages.
Yep. Go to cnccontractorservices.com. Now, Steve's written a number of books. You can start there if you really want to see the educational aspect of it. But the education becomes real and it becomes extremely valuable when it's customized to your unique situation, which you will get with a consultation.
Exactly. Yep. You know, the books are just based on, and these podcasts, just kind of generalizations. I don't know, you know, their personal situation, and every situation is so different. So, you know, that's the great thing about mold. It never gets boring.
Nope. And so if you want customization, the consultation is the best way to go.
Yep.
All right. We'll catch you in the next episode. Prevent toxic mold exposure before it gets in your home. Download Steve's free mold investigation checklist at tinyurl.com/CNC mold checklist. Again, download Steve's free mold investigation checklist at tinyurl.com/CNC mold checklist.